Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest stories. And let us know where you're watching from by leaving your city or country in the comments below. Thank you for your support. The first lie was printed in gold ink. I remember that because my thumb was stained black with copier toner when I held the brochure under the buzzing lights of the Willow Creek Community Center and read the words again. Guaranteed 18% annual returns. Outside, rain slapped against the tall glass doors hard enough to make them tremble. Inside, more than 200 people stood shoulder to shoulder, soaked coats dripping onto the polished floor, their voices rising into one scared, angry sound. Somebody kept pounding on the front desk bell, that sharp little ding cutting through the room every few seconds like a timer counting down. Behind me, the office printer was still coughing out bank statements, page after page, warm paper sliding into the tray with the smell of hot ink and plastic. I had one stack tucked under my arm and another in my hand, thick enough to feel like a brick. On the wall above the coffee station, Victoria Hayes smiled down from a glossy banner in her cream blazer and pearl earrings, one hand raised like she was blessing the whole neighborhood. Your future is guaranteed. That was the slogan she sold us. That was the bait. And by midnight, every family in that room was about to learn what their future had really been used for. My name is Ethan Miller, and 6 months before that night, I was just the guy at the end of Briarwood Lane trying to keep my grass under 3 inches and my mortgage current. I was 42, divorced, and rebuilding my life one quiet weekend at a time. My daughter Grace came over every other Friday with a backpack, a phone charger, and that careful teenage smile kids wear when they know their parents are still figuring things out. I bought my little ranch-style house because it had a 2-car garage, a decent school district, and a back porch where you could hear crickets instead of traffic. Willow Creek estates looked safe. White fences, clean sidewalks, flags on porches, retirees, walking dogs at sunrise. The kind of place where people waved with travel mugs in their hands and pretended nobody ever checked property values on Zillow. Then Victoria walked into our lives with catered lunches, velvet folders, and a voice smooth enough to make risk sound like kindness. She called it the Willow Creek Prosperity Fund, community-backed growth, protected principal, neighbor-to-neighbor wealth building. Words like that floated through the clubhouse over the smell of coffee and lemon cookies while older couples nodded and young parents leaned forward, hungry for a way out of bills that never stopped coming. I almost wanted to believe her. Almost. But I had spent 12 years as an internal auditor before a whistleblower case burned my career down, and there are certain sentences that make the back of my neck tighten. The one buried on page 17 did it. Returns are projected, not insured. I underlined it in blue pen while Victoria was across the room hugging Mrs. Collins, telling her retirement should feel peaceful. And right then, even before the missed payments, before the locked accounts, before the crying started, I knew something in Willow Creek smelled wrong. The next morning, Willow Creek looked too perfect to be dangerous. Sprinklers hissed over clipped lawns. A mail truck rolled past with its little brakes squeaking at every curb. Somewhere down the block, somebody was frying bacon, and the smell drifted over the cold air like nothing bad could ever happen behind those matching beige garage doors. I stood on my porch with that blue underlined brochure in one hand and my coffee going bitter in the other, watching Victoria Hayes step out of her white Mercedes in front of the clubhouse. She moved like she owned the sidewalk, the street, and every breath taken inside the neighborhood. Cream coat, gold watch, hair set so carefully the wind seemed afraid to touch it. She waved at a retired couple near the fountain, and they smiled like they were seeing a daughter come home from college. That was her gift. She made people feel chosen, not sold to. Chosen. I had seen that before in conference rooms downtown, back when I still wore a badge on a lanyard and reviewed expense reports for men who smiled too much. Bad numbers do not start out looking bad. They start out warm, friendly, wrapped in pastries, handshakes, and words like opportunity. Victoria understood that better than anyone. Her first presentation was not even framed as an investment pitch. She called it a community financial wellness night. There were folding chairs in neat rows, a coffee urn humming in the corner, and a folding table stacked with lemon cookies from the bakery on Route 9. Grace had been at my house that weekend, curled up on the couch with homework and earbuds, so I almost skipped it. But the flyer had been tucked under my windshield wiper that afternoon, and something about the phrase principal protection bothered me enough to go. The room was packed. retired teachers, mechanics, nurses, young couples with babies balanced on their knees. Mr. Robert Collins sat in the second row beside his wife, Helen, whose oxygen machine gave off a soft electric puff every few seconds. Robert had worked 38 years repairing freight elevators, and his hands were thick, scarred, honest hands, the kind that made you trust a man before he spoke. When Victoria took the microphone, every whisper died. She talked about inflation eating savings, medical bills ambushing good families, and Wall Street treating ordinary Americans like spare parts. Heads nodded all around me. Then she introduced the fund. Not as a gamble, not as a risk, as a shield. She said local real estate assets backed it. She said early members had already received monthly distributions. She said no family in Willow Creek should have to choose between dignity and survival. People clapped before she finished. I did not. I watched the treasurer, Paul Whitaker, standing near the back wall with his arms folded too tightly, his smile stuck in place like wet paint. Then I saw Victoria glance at him. Just once, sharp and quick. His eyes dropped to the floor. That was the first real crack. Small, quiet, easy to miss. But I had built a career on cracks. After the meeting, Victoria found me near the coffee station, still holding the brochure. She touched my elbow lightly, like we're old friends. Ethan, she said, I heard you used to be in finance. We could use smart neighbors like you on board early. Her perfume smelled like vanilla and something metallic underneath. I asked her who held the custodial accounts. Her smile did not move, but her fingers tightened around her paper cup. Then she laughed softly and said, always the careful one. That was when I knew she had already checked my background. By the second week, Victoria had turned the whole neighborhood into a sales floor without anyone noticing. It started with harmless little things. A thank you breakfast at the clubhouse. A retirement planning coffee hour after church. A glossy insert tucked inside the monthly HOA newsletter between the landscaping reminders and the pool schedule. Her face was everywhere, smiling under soft lights, standing beside happy couples holding oversized checks, shaking hands with local business owners who looked nervous if you watched them long enough. The clubhouse smelled like cinnamon rolls and fresh carpet cleaner every Saturday morning, and every Saturday morning, she filled those folding chairs again. I went because my gut would not let me stay home. Grace teased me about it over pancakes, said I looked like I was going undercover at a bake sale. I smiled for her, but the folder on my kitchen table felt heavier every day. Victoria had a system. First, she talked to the retirees about medical bills and shrinking savings. Then she talked to young families about college tuition and mortgage rates. Then she turned to the blue-collar guys like me and said people who worked with their hands deserve to make their money work just as hard. That line always landed. You could feel it in the room, that small lift of hope when people who were tired of being squeezed finally heard someone promise relief. Robert Collins signed after the third meeting. I watched him do it at the little table near the back exit, his reading glasses sliding down his nose while Helen sat beside him with both hands folded over her purse. Victoria bent close to them, speaking softly, nodding like a nurse taking a pulse. Robert told me later he put in $140,000, nearly everything from an old annuity he had been saving for Helen's care. His voice cracked when he said it, not from fear back then, but from gratitude. He truly believed he had found a way to protect his wife. That was the cruelest part. Victoria did not steal from greedy people chasing yachts. She took from people trying to keep roofs patched, prescriptions filled, and kids in decent schools. The first monthly payments arrived exactly on schedule. Direct deposits. Clean memo lines. $800 here. $1,200 there. Enough to prove the machine worked. Linda Parker used her first distribution to replace her broken furnace before winter. The Thompsons paid down a credit card from their son's emergency room visit. People started bringing Victoria flowers. Someone left a handwritten note on the clubhouse bulletin board calling her a blessing. And every time praise gathered around her, Paul Whitaker looked smaller. Paul was the HOA treasurer, a former insurance adjuster with silver hair, wireframe glasses, and a habit of rubbing the same spot on his wrist when he was anxious. One afternoon, I found him alone outside the mail kiosk, staring at a certified envelope like it had teeth. The air smelled like wet mulch from the flower beds, and the flag rope kept tapping against the metal pole above us. I asked if everything was all right. He flinched so hard the envelope bent in his hand. Then he gave me a smile that did not reach his eyes and said, Just paperwork. That was all. Just paperwork. But 3 days later, my first violation notice arrived. Lawn edging noncompliance. $75 fine. I measured the edge myself with a tape measure from my garage. It was off by less than half an inch. The next notice came 2 days after that. Trash bin visible from street. Then unauthorized exterior item because Grace had left a folding soccer chair beside the garage after practice. By Friday, I had 4 fines, 3 emails from the HOA office, and 1 voicemail from Victoria saying she hoped my negativity about the fund was not affecting my willingness to follow community standards. Her voice came through my phone sweet and polished, but the message underneath was as clear as a hand on the back of my neck. Join us, or we make you lonely. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table while the refrigerator hummed and Grace did homework across from me, tapping her pencil against a geometry worksheet. I opened the HOA portal and downloaded every financial report they had posted for the last 18 months. The files hit my laptop one by one with soft little chimes. Budgets, reserve summaries, meeting minutes, vendor reimbursements. Most people would have seen boring numbers. I saw footprints, and the first one led straight from the HOA reserve account to something called Cedar Trust Holdings. Cedar Trust Holdings sounded harmless enough, the kind of name printed on beige envelopes and forgotten in desk drawers. But when I clicked the vendor detail, the kitchen suddenly felt smaller. The payment history showed 3 transfers from the HOA reserve account over 6 months. $25,000, $40,000, then $110,000 labeled Community Stabilization Allocation. I read that phrase twice while the refrigerator hummed behind me and Grace scratched her pencil across paper like the whole world had not just tilted under my chair. Community Stabilization Allocation. That was not a maintenance expense. That was not pool chemicals, roofing, landscaping, insurance, sidewalk repair, or anything a homeowners association should be quietly moving out the back door. I printed the reports after Grace went to bed. The printer on my desk whined and shook, spitting out page after page until the room smelled like warm toner and dust. I laid everything across the dining table in rows. Dates, amounts, approvals, signatures. Victoria Hayes appeared on every authorization as board president. Paul Whitaker appeared on 2 of them as treasurer. But the third transfer had no board meeting attached to it, no recorded vote, no vendor contract, no invoice. Just a number, a label, and a digital signature that looked copied and pasted from an older document. I sat there until 2 in the morning with cold coffee burning my stomach and the blue glow of my laptop reflecting off the window. Outside, Willow Creek slept under porch lights and automatic sprinklers, peaceful as a postcard. Inside, the math was starting to stink. The next day, I drove to the county records office during my lunch break. It was one of those old brick buildings with squeaky floors, faded flags, and clerks who had seen every kind of family fight, property dispute, and bad decision pass across their counters. The air smelled like paper, floor wax, and stale coffee. I searched Cedar Trust Holdings first. Registered 6 months earlier. Mailing address, a business suite in Wilmington, Delaware. Organizer, Hayes Management Group. My fingers went still on the keyboard. Hayes. Then I searched Hayes Management Group. Registered agent, Daniel Hayes. Victoria's younger brother. I took a picture of the screen with my phone and felt that old auditor instinct wake up in my chest, cold and steady. Follow the related parties. Follow the approvals. Follow who benefits when nobody is looking. By that Friday, the social pressure turned mean. Neighbors who used to wave from their driveways looked away when I passed. Someone posted in the community app that certain residents were spreading fear because they could not stand seeing others succeed. My name was never written, but everybody knew. At the grocery store on Route 9, Linda Parker saw me near the frozen foods and turned her cart so fast a bag of peas slid onto the floor. I picked it up and handed it to her. Her eyes were red. She whispered, "Ethan, please do not ruin this for us." The freezer case buzzed between us, cold air spilling over my shoes. I wanted to tell her it was already ruined. I wanted to show her the records right there between the waffles and orange juice. But evidence without timing is just noise, and Victoria had trained them to hear me as the enemy. So I swallowed it. I went home. I built a spreadsheet. Every investor I could identify. Every payment date. Every distribution rumor from the clubhouse. Every HOA transfer. By midnight, A pattern formed on my screen, so clean it made my hands go cold. New deposits came in. Old investors got paid. The fund showed momentum. Then Victoria held another meeting and used those payments as proof. It was not growth. It was rotation. Money from the next neighbor was being used to calm the last one. And buried under it all was the HOA reserve fund, quietly tied to the scheme like a life raft nobody had agreed to launch. The knock came at 6:12 the next morning. 3 sharp taps. I opened the door to find Robert Collins standing on my porch in a brown cardigan, his hair uncombed, his face gray under the porch light. The morning smelled like wet grass and gasoline from a passing school bus. He held a folded bank statement in both hands. "Ethan," he said, voice barely above the sprinkler hiss. Helen's care payment bounced. Then he looked past me at the papers covering my dining table, and for the first time, he did not look grateful anymore. He looked awake. Robert stepped inside like a man entering a doctor's office after already guessing the diagnosis. He stood at the edge of my dining room, staring at the papers, the highlighted bank transfers, the county records, the lines of red ink connecting names to companies that were supposed to be invisible. Rain tapped against the kitchen window in soft little clicks. The coffee maker popped and hissed behind us, forgotten on the counter. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. Then Robert unfolded his bank statement and placed it beside my spreadsheet with hands that trembled just enough to make the paper whisper. There it was. His expected monthly distribution had not arrived. The same payment Victoria had promised would cover Helen's in-home care nurse. The same payment Robert had bragged about at the mailbox 2 weeks earlier, his face bright with relief. Now his eyes looked hollow, like someone had turned the lights off behind them. I asked him if he had called Victoria. He gave a dry little laugh, the kind with no humor in it. 3 times, he said. First her assistant told me the bank had a processing delay. Then Paul said there was a temporary liquidity adjustment. Then Victoria herself called Helen and told her not to worry her husband with financial anxiety. That last sentence made the room go cold. Not because it was loud, because it was careful. Victoria knew exactly where people were soft, and she pressed there with manicured fingers. I pulled out a chair for Robert, and he sat down slowly, the old wood creaking under him. I showed him Cedar Trust Holdings. I showed him Hayes Management Group. I showed him the Homeowners Association reserve transfers and the missing meeting vote. At first, he tried to explain it away. Maybe it was an accounting shortcut. Maybe the board approved it privately. Maybe Victoria had a reason. People do that when the truth is too expensive. They bargain with it. They ask it to be smaller than it is. But when I showed him Daniel Hayes listed as registered agent, Robert stopped talking. His mouth opened once, then closed. Outside, the school bus sighed at the curb and pulled away, leaving the smell of diesel in the wet morning air. Robert looked at me and said, "My wife thanked that woman." That was the moment this stopped being suspicion and became a case. I made copies of everything before he left. Clean copies for him. Working copies for me. Digital scans backed up to a cloud folder Grace did not know existed. I told Robert not to confront Victoria yet. Not at the clubhouse, not by email, not in the community app where her loyal board members watched every word like guards at a gate. He nodded, but I could see shame working on him. That is another thing people like Victoria count on. Shame keeps victims quiet longer than fear ever could. By noon, Robert had given me 3 names. Linda Parker, the Thompsons, a retired firefighter named Alan Briggs who had rolled part of his pension into the fund after Victoria told him it was safer than leaving it exposed to the market. I called each one carefully. No accusations. No panic. Just questions. Did your payment arrive? Were you given a prospectus? Did anyone explain that returns were not insured? The answers came back in whispers, then screenshots, then forwarded emails. My phone buzzed all afternoon on the kitchen table, each vibration another crack spreading through Victoria's perfect wall. By sunset, I had a folder labeled Willow Creek Evidence, and the folder had weight even though it lived inside a laptop. There were brochures with gold ink, promissory notes with soft language, screenshots of Victoria calling the fund principal protected, a voicemail from her assistant saying the Homeowners Association stood behind community investors. That phrase mattered. Stood behind. It sounded comforting to retirees. To an attorney, it sounded like liability. Around 8 that night, Paul Whitaker called me from a blocked number. I could hear traffic in the background and wind hitting his microphone. He did not say hello. He said, "Ethan, stop pulling records." Then he breathed hard, like the words had cost him something. I asked him what he was afraid of. There was a pause so long I thought the call had dropped. Then he said, "You have no idea what she put in front of us." Paul hung up before I could ask another question, but the damage was done. His fear had a shape now. It was not rumor, and it was not guilt from sloppy bookkeeping. It was something sitting in a drawer, signed, stamped, and waiting to crush the whole neighborhood. I called him back twice, straight to voicemail. Then I sat in my kitchen with the lights off, listening to rain tick against the vent hood and my laptop fan whisper over the table. Grace was asleep down the hall, her bedroom door cracked open, a thin strip of nightlight glowing across the hardwood. I remember looking at that light and thinking about how many parents in Willow Creek had put money into Victoria's fund because they wanted their children to feel safe. That was the part that made my hands steady. Not the anger, the responsibility. The next morning, I drove to Paul's house before work. He lived on Marigold Court in a tidy blue colonial with trimmed hedges and a flag mounted beside the garage. His car was in the driveway, but every blind was shut. I knocked once. Nothing. I knocked again. A dog barked 2 houses over. Somewhere a leaf blower growled to life, pushing the smell of cut grass and gasoline across the street. When Paul finally opened the door, he looked 10 years older than he had at the mail kiosk. His shirt was wrinkled, his glasses sat crooked, and his eyes kept flicking past me toward the street like Victoria might rise out of the storm drain. I told him Robert's payment had bounced. I told him I had the Cedar Trust records. I told him if the reserve account was tied to investor funds without a valid vote, every homeowner in Willow Creek could be exposed. His face folded when I said that. Not dramatically, just one small collapse around the mouth. Then he stepped back and let me in. His house smelled like burnt toast and old paper. He led me to a dining room where file boxes covered the floor, stacked beside an unplugged shredder. That detail hit me hard. An unplugged shredder means somebody thought about destroying records, then stopped. Paul pulled a folder from beneath a pile of HOA insurance forms and set it on the table like it was alive. The tab read, Supplemental Community Asset Guarantee. My throat went dry before I even opened it. The first page claimed the HOA board had authorized reserve funds, common area assessments, and future dues as supporting collateral for the Willow Creek Prosperity Fund. Future dues. That meant Victoria had not just taken investor money. She had quietly tied every homeowner's monthly payment to her private scheme. The signature page had 5 board names. Victoria's was clean and bold. Paul's looked shaky. 2 others looked scanned. One belonged to a board member who had moved to Arizona 3 months before the date printed at the top. I looked up at Paul. He was rubbing that same spot on his wrist. She said it was temporary, he whispered. She said the first quarter returns would replace the reserve transfer before anyone noticed. Then she said if I refused, she would tell everyone I had approved the earlier payments alone. His voice broke on the word alone. There it was. The hook in his mouth. Victoria had built the fraud, then made sure other people's fingerprints were close enough to take the fall. I photographed every page on my phone. Paul did not stop me. In fact, he opened another box and handed me meeting packets, draft minutes, email printouts, and a thumb drive with a strip of masking tape across it. Written on the tape in blue ink were 3 words. Victoria Board Audio. My pulse kicked once hard. Paul said she recorded strategy meetings for notes, then forgot who had copies. I plugged the drive into my laptop at home that night with my curtains closed and the porch light off. The audio crackled. Then Victoria's voice filled my kitchen, calm as Sunday brunch. Seniors need reassurance. Pay the first ones on time, and the rest will follow. Then Daniel Hayes laughed softly in the background and said, by the time they ask real questions, the second round will cover the whole. I sat there in the blue laptop glow, hearing the rainwater drip from my gutters, and I knew the truth finally had a voice. The recording changed everything, but it did not make the next step easier. A voice on a flash drive is powerful in a kitchen at midnight. In the real world, power needs dates, documents, witnesses, and someone with authority willing to listen before Victoria cleans the whole house with bleach and smiles through it. I made 3 copies before sunrise. 1 went to an encrypted folder. 1 went to a new flash drive I taped under the false bottom of my toolbox in the garage. 1 went inside a plain manila envelope marked gray school forms, because no thief in Willow Creek would ever care about geometry homework. The morning air smelled like wet leaves and engine exhaust when I drove Grace to school. She was quiet in the passenger seat, twisting the zipper pull on her backpack. Halfway there, she asked why Mrs. Parker had told her daughter not to sit with her at lunch. That question landed harder than any fine Victoria had sent me. I kept both hands on the wheel and watched the white lane stripes slide under the hood. I told Grace that sometimes people get scared and aim their fear at the nearest person instead of the right person. She looked out the window and said, "So you are the nearest person." I had no answer that would not sound like an apology. After drop-off, I called the state securities division from the parking lot of a gas station on Route 9, with trucks rumbling beside me and the smell of coffee and diesel coming through the cracked window. The first woman transferred me twice. The second man sounded bored until I said unregistered investment pool, homeowners association collateral, and recorded admission. Then the line went quiet. His name was Marcus Bell, senior investigator, and his voice lost all laziness at once. He told me not to confront anyone, not to post anything online, not to warn the board. He asked if I could provide copies safely. I said yes. He asked if there were elderly investors. I looked at Robert's name on the spreadsheet and felt my jaw tighten. More than half, I said. By noon, Marcus had given me a secure upload link and the name of a local attorney who handled financial fraud for groups of victims. By 2, Robert and I were sitting in that attorney's office downtown, where the carpet smelled new and the conference table reflected every tired line in our faces. Her name was Dana Whitcomb, and she read the first 3 pages without speaking. Then she put on reading glasses, read the collateral agreement twice, and said the words I had been waiting for. "This is not just bad judgment. This is structured deception." Robert exhaled like he had been holding his breath for 6 months. Dana did not promise miracles. Good lawyers never do. She said we needed affidavits, original brochures, bank records, and proof that investors had been told their money was protected. She said the homeowners association angle made it uglier, because Victoria may have exposed non-investing residents to losses without consent. That was the second blade hidden in the handle. Even people who had refused the fund, people like me, had still been dragged behind it through reserve accounts and future dues. That evening, I became a collector of quiet fear. Linda Parker came by after dark with a folder under her coat, glancing down the street before stepping inside. Alan Briggs sent pension transfer records from an email address named after his fishing boat. The Thompsons dropped off screenshots in a diaper bag while their baby slept in the back seat. One by one, the people Victoria had charmed began leaving pieces of the truth on my dining table. The paper stacks grew. The printer warmed the room. The smell of toner settled into the curtains. At 9:37, Victoria sent a community-wide message announcing a final opportunity meeting for the next night. Additional deposits would be accepted. New returns would begin. Immediately, I read it once, then looked at the gold brochure lying beside my laptop. She was not stopping. She was doubling down. And this time, we would let her walk onto the stage by herself. The clubhouse was brighter than I had ever seen it, like Victoria wanted the walls themselves to testify for her. Every chandelier was on. Every folding chair had been wiped clean and lined in rows. The coffee urn hissed beside a tray of store-bought pastries, and the whole room smelled like vanilla creamer, damp wool, and nervous money. People came in holding checkbooks, bank envelopes, retirement statements, and quiet hope. That was what made my stomach twist. Even after the missed payments, even after the whispers, Victoria still had them close enough to reach for their wallets one more time. She stood near the stage in a navy dress and pearl earrings, smiling for photographs beside a poster that said Final Enrollment Window. Daniel Hayes hovered near the side door with a tablet under his arm, pretending to be invisible and failing at it. Paul Whitaker sat in the back row, pale as printer paper, both hands wrapped around a foam coffee cup he never drank from. I arrived late on purpose. My jacket was wet from the rain. My shoes squeaked against the polished floor. Under one arm, I carried a cardboard file box. In my pocket was the flash drive. In the third row, Robert turned and saw me. He gave one small nod, the kind of nod men give when fear has finally turned into resolve. Dana Whitcomb sat 2 seats from him with a yellow legal pad on her lap. Near the rear exit, a man in a gray sport coat checked his phone and looked around without drawing attention. Marcus Bell, the state investigator. Victoria did not know his face. That was the best part. She tapped the microphone at 7 o'clock sharp, and the speakers popped loud enough to make a few people flinch. Then she gave them the voice. Warm, steady, practiced. She talked about temporary banking delays, irresponsible rumors, and the courage required to build community wealth when outsiders wanted ordinary families to stay afraid. Every sentence had polish on it. Every lie came wrapped in concern. Then she said it. No family in Willow Creek will ever lose money under my watch. I stood up before the applause could begin. The chair legs scraped behind me, a thin metal scream across the floor. Victoria's smile froze for half a second. Ethan, she said, this is not the time for personal grievances. I kept walking. Not fast, not dramatic. Just straight down the center aisle with the box in my hands and 200 pairs of eyes following me. My heartbeat sounded too loud inside my ears, but my voice came out level. This is not personal, Victoria. This is math. Daniel moved toward the projector table, but Dana was already standing. Marcus Bell shifted near the rear door. Daniel stopped. I plugged my flash drive into the laptop connected to the screen. The first image appeared behind Victoria, 20 feet wide and impossible to soften. Cedar Trust Holdings. Registered agent, Daniel Hayes. A murmur moved through the room like wind through dry leaves. The second slide showed the HOA reserve transfers. $25,000, $40,000, $110,000. Then the collateral agreement. Future dues. Common area assessments. Reserve funds. Linda Parker covered her mouth. Someone behind me whispered, they used our HOA fees? Victoria stepped toward me, her heels clicking fast, her perfume cutting through the coffee smell like sharp flowers. That document is being taken out of context, she said. I clicked again. The signature page appeared, including the board member who had been living in Arizona when he supposedly approved it. Paul made a sound from the back row, not quite a cough, not quite a sob. Then I played the audio. Static filled the speakers first. Then Victoria's own voice rolled across the clubhouse. Calm and clean and unmistakable. Seniors need reassurance. Pay the first ones on time, and the rest will follow. Nobody moved. Even the coffee urns seemed to go quiet. Daniel's laugh came next, thin and ugly through the speakers, talking about the second round covering the hole. That was when the room changed. Not loud at first. Just breath leaving bodies. Checkbooks closing. Chairs shifting. Trust breaking in real time. Victoria reached for the laptop, but Dana stepped between us and said, do not touch evidence. Marcus Bell was already walking down the aisle, badge open in his hand, voice calm enough to chill the room. Mrs. Hayes, I need you to step away from the table. And for the first time since I had known her, Victoria Hayes had nothing polished left to say. The badge did not make Victoria panic at first. People like her do not believe consequences belong in the same room with them. She straightened her shoulders, smoothed the front of her navy dress, and gave Marcus Bell the kind of smile she had used on retirees, contractors, board members, and probably every bank teller within 20 miles. Investigator, she said, I am sure this looks confusing without proper context. The microphone was still live. Her voice filled the clubhouse, thinner now, stretched tight around the edges. Marcus did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He asked Daniel Hayes to put the tablet on the nearest chair. He asked Paul Whitaker to remain available for a statement. He asked me to make sure the files on the projector stayed open. That calm, ordinary language did more damage than shouting ever could. It made everything real. The room woke up in pieces. Robert stood first, one hand gripping the back of his chair, the other holding Helen's bounced care invoice. Linda Parker started crying quietly into a napkin, not loud, not theatrical, just the small broken sound of someone realizing the furnace money had come from somebody else's fear. The Thompsons sat frozen with their checkbooks still open on the husband's knee. All around us, people began looking at their papers differently, like the ink itself had betrayed them. Victoria tried one more time to take control. She turned to the crowd and said this was a misunderstanding created by a disgruntled neighbor with a personal agenda. That would have worked a week earlier, maybe even a day earlier. But the screen behind her still showed the transfers. The speakers had just played her own words. The gold brochures were stacked in my file box like little monuments to a lie. I pulled out one final page and placed it on the table for Dana. It was the line I had underlined, the first night, buried on page 17. Returns are projected, not insured. Dana read it, then looked at the crowd, and explained in plain English what Victoria had avoided saying for months. The principal was not protected. The returns were not guaranteed. The Homeowners Association had no legal right to pledge future dues without proper approval. Every sentence landed like a door closing. By 9:15, the clubhouse had changed from a sales meeting into an evidence room. Marcus took statements near the kitchen counter while the coffee went cold in paper cups. Dana collected investor packets and had people write their names on sticky notes. Paul handed over the original board files with both hands. Daniel stopped talking after Marcus asked about Cedar Trust Holdings. Victoria sat at the front table, her pearl earrings catching the fluorescent light every time she turned her head toward another person who would not meet her eyes anymore. The next morning, the news vans arrived before the sprinklers turned off. Their tires hissed over the wet curb outside the clubhouse. By noon, the state had frozen the fund accounts. By Friday, a judge had issued an order blocking any use of HOA reserve money until a full audit could be completed. Within 3 weeks, Victoria was removed from the board, Daniel's companies were under investigation, and Willow Creek had its first honest community meeting in years. Nobody clapped at that one. Nobody brought pastries. People just sat under those buzzing lights with folders in their laps, tired and embarrassed, and finally telling the truth out loud. Not every family got everything back. That is the part stories like this usually try to soften, but I will not. Some savings were gone. Some payments were delayed. Some people had to call adult children and explain what happened. Robert and Helen recovered enough to keep her care going, but he stopped standing near the clubhouse bulletin board where Victoria used to post her smiling updates. Shame takes longer to unwind than paperwork. A month later, Grace helped me clean out the evidence boxes from my dining room. The house smelled like lemon cleaner and printer dust. She picked up the old banner from the first meeting, the one with Victoria's perfect smile and those golden words about the future. For a second, I thought about throwing it away. Instead, I folded it and placed it in the last box for the attorneys. Grace watched me tape it shut and asked if I felt better. I looked through the window at Willow Creek, at the clean sidewalks, the quiet lawns, the neighbors finally talking to each other again without whispers hiding underneath. I told her better was not the word. Honest was closer. Victoria sold them certainty because fear is profitable when it wears a friendly face. But numbers remember. Paper remembers. People remember once someone gives them permission to stop being ashamed. Justice did not arrive with thunder. It came in copier toner, bank records, quiet witnesses, and one sentence spoken into a microphone by a woman who thought nobody was keeping receipts. She promised them safety. The truth did what her promise never could. It held.